Hi and welcome to this evening's live stream from the Scottish Greens. We're going to be talking about the importance of having young elected representatives in Parliament and also at council level and all across Scotland. This evening I am joined by Ross Greer and Kim Long. Ross is standing for re-election in the West Region and Kim is standing for election in Glasgow. Unfortunately, we can't be joined this evening by Gillian Mackay following a family bereavement, so we're wishing Gillian all the best and our condolences are with her. Thanks to everyone who's joined. Please get involved in the conversation in the comments box below. So yeah, how you doing, Ross? How are you getting on?
Not bad. I feel I'm in that weird stage now where, like midnight last night, MSPs usually all turn into pumpkins and you're not an MSP anymore. But this time the rules are slightly different. We have to technically be MSPs all the way until the 5th of May. We just can't do any of the stuff MSPs usually do. It's just in case Parliament needs recalled because of the pandemic. So there would usually be like that finite cutoff, and you're not an MSP anymore. Now you're a candidate, and I feel like I'm in the kind of twilight zone between the two of them. And I'm still getting, constituents are still emailing and things like that. So there's no rest, and there shouldn't be.
Kim, this is what you have got to look forward to come next session. Yeah, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm all right, thanks. Yeah, no rest for the wicked. But I'm feeling that too. Like, I'm a councillor in Glasgow, in the northeast, and yeah, it's so busy. We've just had so much casework because of coronavirus, obviously, and that hasn't really stopped. And yeah, the council doesn't stop for the Holyrood election. So yeah, my to-do list is just sort of endless, and yeah, I'm just sending sort of groveling emails to people saying, I'm sorry, I'm doing everything I can, I will get back to you. But yeah, I got some stuff done today, so this is good.
Well, let's start with that then, Kim, because you mentioned that you're a councillor for the Dennistoun area, which is fantastic. You obviously got elected a few years ago now, following a groundbreaking campaign, I have to say. What got you into that? Why did you want to be a politician? I think that when people think of politicians, they always think of, you hear the stereotypical comments like, oh, they're all the same, oh, I don't trust them, blah, blah, blah. And I think when looking at the lists for the Green politicians standing in May, it doesn't fit that mould. It's totally different. Just looking at this call, for example, two of you are younger, positive, enthusiastic people. So yeah, why did you get into politics and why did you want to stand and be a councillor?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still like super uncomfortable with being a politician. It doesn't feel like that's me at all. I'm an activist and a community worker, and I happen to be in politics at the moment, so yeah, that was my kind of background, was doing community work, and I was working with young people, I was working with women, I was working with men in prisons, and it was just the same kind of stuff that was happening over and over again, that people are kept unequal by the kind of policies and systems that we have in place. And I just got really fed up trying to mitigate poverty and inequality, and I wanted to try and dive in and I'm mixing my metaphors here, but you've got to, at some point, you've got to go further upstream and try and stop people being pushed into the water in the first place. So yeah, started doing more like political activism with a big P. I was already in the Greens, so I got more involved, started campaigning more. And yeah, I got elected in 2017, and I'm the first Green councillor in the East End of Glasgow.
So there'll be many people watching this that are thinking, why the Green Party? There'll be people out there watching this who've not made up their mind how they're going to vote yet, Ross. Why was it the Green Party for you, and at what age did you get involved?
So I was 15 when I joined the Greens. Someone tweeted in reply to something that I put out this week, accusing me of just being a political careerist, and it reminded me of how I got into politics. And I thought, yeah, mate, because the strongest route to a political career was to join the Scottish Greens when I was 15, and there were 900 people in the party, so there were more people at my high school than there were in the Green Party, and I think we had 10 elected reps in total, 2 MSPs and 8 councillors. But yeah, that's what every budding 15-year-old like political careerist thinks. The Greens, that's the strongest option for me to get a job doing this. No, I mean, I joined the party then because it was very much the climate that motivated me. Like, I knew by that point that I was a socialist. That was how I would describe myself. I knew what I thought of in terms of social and economic justice, but what really did it for me was the combination of, even at that point, so that was 2009 when I joined the party, seeing the urgency of the crisis, seeing it unfold, seeing the damage it was already doing to people. I remember at that point, like one of the things that really made me start to think much deeper about this was reading reports about how at that point it was about 150,000 people a year were already dying because of the climate crisis. And it was overwhelmingly people in the global south. It was overwhelmingly people from nations who just had not caused it. I thought, well, that's none of the dots are being joined up between that and what I'm seeing in politics here, which is all about maximizing profit. It's all about, you know, more oil and gas, build more motorways. There was no sense of how do we actually do things in a way that serve people and planet, whether it's people here or people who live in the global south or wherever else. And thought, yeah, actually, to me, there was something quite satisfying that green politics joined the dots. It said, you know, social, economic and environmental crises, they're all interrelated. So the solutions have to be as well. These aren't different silos and you don't deal with them separately. And I saw every other party trying to deal with it separately. I thought, no, actually, like the Greens have this holistic vision for society. We believe that things can fundamentally be better on every level for everyone. That made me at 15, I thought, yeah, like I'm angry about this stuff. I'm motivated about this stuff. I could just keep shit posting about it on Twitter, or I could, you know, do something. It felt to me a little bit arrogant to just think I could just keep moaning about it. I could just keep shouting. I felt some kind of responsibility to try and help. And the party, the Greens at that point, to me, felt like the way you could do it, felt like we could really build something there. And quite a few years later, that's what we've done.
I love how you mentioned, you know, when it was 15 and you were at school when you got involved in politics, because I think, thinking back to when I was at school, and, you know, politics isn't usually the go-to thing, but I think now we've seen a lot more younger people across the world, you know, getting involved in politics, and we've seen, you know, the strike for climate that have been led across the world, which have been really inspiring. Kim, do you remember your first steps and what age you were and what the triggering moment, if there was one, for getting yourself involved?
Yeah, like I'm very lucky that I had two phenomenal youth workers, and it's one of the reasons I'm so passionate about youth work is because I know what a difference it made to me, you know, partly on that kind of just having someone who was looking out for you and who you could talk to about stuff, but also that was a way that my friends and I were then exposed to different issues, like global issues, to then, you know, just kind of like encouraged to explore what we thought about things, you know, and develop your opinions, develop critical thinking, start like looking at the media and looking at how things are being portrayed. And I have always had a really keen sense of injustice, I think, and I've always been angry about it. I've always been angry. But yeah, and then like for me, a big turning point was the anti-Iraq war protests. So I was 13 and I went on the protests, and for me it was just this like phenomenal thing of that energy that you've like, I now know that I feel like an energy in crowds when there's that kind of unified purpose, you know. And it was people from all over Scotland, all over Glasgow. It was like, I think the biggest protest in Glasgow for a long, long time. And I just found that like quite overwhelming, but totally amazing to be part of. And then when they went to war anyway, it was just this like sense of, and like it was privileged to have got to 13 without realising that the government is not on your side. But that was a realisation of like, oh, they're not listening. They're not listening, and they're not even pretending to listen. Not to me, but never mind not to me, but like not to adults. Do you know what I mean? Not to grown-ups and activists and experts who are kind of out on the streets and who have to vote for them and they're supposed to be accountable to. So that was the big thing for me of, all right, okay, like they're not doing this properly. So yeah, and like I joined the CND and put a poster in my bedroom window, and yeah, so that was my first turning point, I guess. And then I just stayed politically active, but not in a party, but just kind of really engaged with different issues and protests really from then.
Ross, what would your message be to young people who are maybe watching and thinking about getting involved in politics and getting involved with the Scottish Green Party? What would your message be? What would be the first thing that you'd say to them, and why should they do it?
Don't wait. The idea that politics is something you should do once you've had like quote unquote life experience elsewhere is bullshit, and it's bullshit designed to keep you out because you being there makes the people in power really uncomfortable. And I've seen that. I've experienced that firsthand, and I know that Kim has as well. Like, politics, whether it's your council chamber or a national parliament or a community council or anything else, it should look like the people it seeks to represent. If it's a representative body, it should look like the people it represents. That should be a really simple statement. So if we set this expectation up that actually politics is only something you should do once you've gone and had a career in something else, once you've gone and had a career in, you know, in law or in the media or whatever, all you're doing is locking people out, and you've automatically excluded a huge chunk of the population. And it's not just about saying, well, obviously everyone has had an experience of being young. Like MSPs are 50 years older than me, clearly had an experience of being young, but it was in a fundamentally different period of time. So like my generation, I've friends who've now a good few years out of university who are still stuck in private rented accommodation they wanted out of a long time ago, who are still stuck in 0 hours contracts, who were doing hospitality work, obviously not in the last year, they were in bars and restaurants and stuff. It's a completely different experience. The generational experience is different. It's not just about, oh, I know what it was like to be young. People who were young 40 years ago don't know what it's like to be in your 20s now, in this decade. So the idea that we have to wait is just something that you shouldn't have any patience for whatsoever. And if you hesitate about it, if you think, I don't know if I know enough about this, spend a little bit of time watching Parliament TV or watching a live stream of a council committee meeting or something. Nothing will give you more of a self-confidence boost than seeing some of the people who arrive at those meetings who've got themselves elected with an incredible level of self-confidence, but no ability to back it up. If you think, oh no, that surely comes with age, I guarantee you 5 minutes in, you'll find that's been completely disproved. And one thing that I always appreciated about the Greens was it was the first place, you know, I joined at 15 and got steadily more involved. It was one place where I never felt like I was being treated differently because of my age. I'm not saying like the party's perfect and we've got some perfect internal culture. We're flawed just like any other group of people. But the Greens was the first place I went to where I thought I was being treated just as seriously as everyone else in the room, and I was being pretty constantly encouraged. That was partly because back then there were like 3 or 4 of us in any room maximum at any point, so you had to take on umpteen different jobs. But the fact that, you know, young people, or my case, the young person in the room of 4 people, I was constantly being encouraged, said, you know, you can do that. And there wasn't any discussion about, you know, in a couple of years' time, come back and you'll have had more experience first. No, like apart from anything else, given what our politics represents, we've literally got 9 years left before the climate reaches its tipping point. We don't have time for a generation of people who know how to solve this to wait until they've gone and done something else for 20 years' time. This is it. If you ever want to get involved in politics, these are the years in which to do it. This is where it matters more than it has ever done before.
Yeah, and also,
thanks.
Yeah, it's just like, also we're with you. Like I believe that the Scottish Greens have the youngest demographic of political parties in Scotland, and especially like in Glasgow branch where I'm a member, like it's a lot of young people, it's a lot of people of all ages, but we are, like, I hope, and I think we've worked really hard to be welcoming to people and people from different backgrounds. Yeah, I've always felt like I could be at home, and I also think we take it really seriously. Like those of us who've been around for a while now, like try really hard to welcome people and get people on board. So you don't need to like have this level of knowledge before you get involved. No one's asking you to stand for election tomorrow. Like just get stuck in, like come and help us campaign because we need all the help we can get. Like see if you can, you know, like share stuff on social media. Like there's so many things, even in a pandemic, there's so many things that you can do to help. And like the other thing about, like, I did not join the Greens to make friends. Like I had friends, thanks very much, but I have made these amazing friendships with people because it's like-minded people, you know, so we're all there because we've got the same values. And so we've been through all the ups and downs that come with political activism as being a Green in Scotland at the moment, you know, and we've gone through all that together. And so like that really forges something among you, and you know, we just like we're just never not talking to each other. And so yeah, it's a really good place to just meet people who have the same values as you, actually. And it's really, yeah, like come and join us, we need you.
The point about like you don't need to have the knowledge, I think that's such an important one. Not just, I mean, Kim's right, you're not going to be asked to stand and be a candidate on day one of joining the party. You used to, a couple of years ago when we were a small party, if you turned up to your first meeting, you were probably going to be a by-election candidate in a couple of weeks, but not anymore. But even if it gets to that point, like that was by far my biggest insecurity when I got elected, was I won't know nearly enough as much as others about this stuff. I wasn't a policy expert, I didn't have a university degree. Pretty much everyone in Parliament does. I had all sorts of insecurities, just constantly thinking I'm going to be the one in this room who knows the least about this, and that absolutely did not turn out to be the case. And apart from anything else, you don't need to and should not need to be an expert. Like, whether it's Parliament or Council Chamber or whatever, these are lay bodies. Like, we're not elected on the basis of knowledge, we're elected on the basis of values and our ability to actually fulfill them. You are supported by the experts. If you're thinking of running for council or Parliament or whatever, like, the experts come in as witnesses and supply evidence. They are your staff and your policy advisors. They're the clerks of the Parliament. The most important thing to have if you're thinking of getting in politics, if you're thinking of running for office, is a clear understanding of what you actually believe in. Like, have core values. I always distinguish between the two types of people who come and speak to me because they are interested in running for Parliament, are the people who just really like the idea of having that job, versus the people who have a really, really strong idea of what they want the world to look like, or what they want to happen in their own community. And that latter group of people, that's exactly who we need. The former group of people are generally the ones who have, politics degrees and loads of policy knowledge and stuff, but don't necessarily have an agenda. They don't know what they really want to do with it. It's the people who are really seriously driven because they know what they want to achieve. They know how things can and should be better. That's all you need to run for office. You don't need a PhD in political science.
You both mentioned something quite interesting there, and it's, you don't have to have a degree. You started this at a young age. You both went into institutions that are historically white and historically male. What was it like when you first went through that door? I suppose I'll put the question to both of you. Was there some worry there that I'm not really sure, I've not done this before, or was it, you know what, I'm going to hit the ground running and I'm going to prove these people wrong?
Kim's stories about this are way better than mine, so she has to go first.
I mean, yeah, so you got the City Chambers in Glasgow, which is a city built on the wealth of enslaved people, and the Portrait Gallery, which is on the top floor, and it's where the office that I work in, or did work before COVID. It's where the Green office is. And so to get to my office, I have to walk past these portraits of old white men, most of whom are in like military dress. Half of them are lords, and it's all the old Lord Provosts. And it really doesn't make you feel like you belong there. However, some things happen. So first of all, there's one of the Lord Provosts who is the first woman, actually. She's in the 60s, and her portrait is like diagonally opposite where I would come out the door. And so I started like looking at that, and then that gave me a bit of courage of like, well, she was doing this in the 60s when, the overwhelming message to women was, be in the kitchen and be a housewife. And so that was a bit of like, okay, right, well, she was doing this and she was like a total firebrand socialist. And so, some women have done it before. The other thing in Glasgow, to be honest, like, I'm really lucky because, or not lucky, like I stand on the shoulders of those who fought the battles before me. Do you know what I mean? Because actually in Glasgow we've got, there was a big turnover of new councillors in 2017, and some of that was to do with people who got involved in big P politics after IndyRef. So there was a big turnover. It was half the councillors were new, and that was helpful, I think, in terms of fresh air. There was a huge shift of Glasgow having been Labour for years and years and years and years, and then having a minority SNP administration. And yeah, and there are other women. There's 32 women councillors in Glasgow, and we also have a woman leader. We have a woman CEO, a woman like chief solicitor, a woman. We did have a woman head of finance and things. So there are women in these senior roles, and that did make it easier. Having said that, so yeah, I definitely felt, because I had pink hair as well, and I was the wild thing about running for election is that so the polling day is the Thursday, the count is the Friday, and then on the Monday you start the job. That is a stupid, who thought of that? Like, it's absolutely wild. It's such a barrier. Because obviously, like, if you've had a job beforehand, which most people have to have a job while you're campaigning, because you can't afford to do that. So like, what do you do with your job? What do you do with all of your other responsibilities, your caring responsibilities? And I was just like, what do I wear? Oh my God, I'm a community worker. What do I wear? And the first thing we had to do is, this was absolutely bizarre, like a freshers' fair. We had to go down to the huge big banqueting hall, and all of the department heads were standing there shaking hands with you all, and like, you didn't know what the departments were or what they were for, and then they were like, come over here and take a photo, and I was like, what? So yeah, that was, I feel like I can't really extricate what it was to be a young councillor to being a young woman councillor, because that's very much coloured my experience. And I definitely felt the need to be very, like, professionally dressed, I guess, to be taken more seriously because of my pink hair. And there had definitely been, like, loads of times where old men councillors, like, they talk over me, they talk to my colleagues instead of me. Like, literally, if there's two of us standing there, they will talk to the man, because they're all taller than me, and men taking my ideas. Oh my God. And this is standard, like, this is not politics, this is not unique to politics, this is every experience of a woman in a kind of job. But in a meeting, like, you'll say something and then 10 minutes will go by and then a man will say exactly what you just said, and then everyone will go like, oh, that's a great idea, well done, John or whoever, and you're like, thanks, that was my idea. So that's just really tiresome. And I think that happens to women of all ages. But yeah, the weird thing, like, I did have, I was able to hit the ground running in terms of, like, the committees and things because of just some of my background. I was very prepared for that, and because I did prepare, I mean, honestly, like, see, reading the committee papers and doing the work and preparing what you're going to say and having questions prepared puts you in a better position than some people who just turn up and they haven't done any prep. The arrogance, honestly, the confidence, it doesn't stop some people talking anyway, and they're like, oh, I've skim read this, and you're like, well, don't talk then, no one wants to know your ill-formed opinion. So yeah, just having done the prep, actually, and then I just asked questions, and that was good. And also, I think it was good to be someone who wasn't institutionalized yet, like, I asked things, and one of the things, this is a really specific anecdote, but there was, like, a specific, like, working group. It was about inequalities issues, it was about violence against women, so it was really important. And then I was just reading it, and then it said that the chair of the group should be this particular councillor, and I was like, wait, it literally says a named individual in the standing orders for this working group. How does that work? Like, what if that person leaves or something happens to them? How can you have that? And then they were like, oh, I don't know how that happened, we'll need to write you a report. And then they wrote a report to the next meeting, and then that report said they didn't know how it happened, so they needed to write another report. Anyway, long story short, cut to 4 years later, and I was proved right, because that councillor has just had to leave the council and no longer exists. So I was completely right to point that out in my first 6 months of being there, and it took a very long time and it shouldn't have happened. But being new and able to point out those things and having the confidence to just, like, keep going, even though they were all telling me that, oh, this isn't how it's done. It's like, yes, but it's wrong. So yeah, I think there's a lot that we bring in terms of being new as well. And it's good, like, that was good for the council overall, do you know what I mean? That made it healthier and more democratic and more accountable.
Thanks, Kim. Ross, did you have similar experiences? I suppose that, when you go into these places, you'll grow in confidence in yourself as well, but that's not to say that you've not got that underlying confidence as well, and you know that you've got that ability to make change.
Yeah, I mean, I think even now, like, I finally feel, particularly, like, as a group of what was 6 of us elected back in 2016, we all ended up with a bunch of different portfolios. So I'm the Scottish Green spokesperson on education and skills, culture and media, Europe and external affairs. That's a whole bunch of areas, some of which I knew a fair amount about before, and others much less. So I finally feel 5 years in, like, I've really got to that point where I'm really comfortable talking about what I'm supposed to talk about. It has taken that long. And that's why I'm really glad that we don't do what other parties do, which is just kind of constantly reshuffle, because I finally feel like I've built relationships and trust and credibility. And I think there was definitely that extra dimension there because the age I was, being 21 when I was elected, I really felt like I had to put a slightly different kind of work in, or put more work in to get that credibility. Not particularly with other MSPs, though, it has to be said. Like there are two instances where I was absolutely patronised because of my age, and they're both really funny. So one was in a World Refugee Day debate in 2017. So we had that debate not long after I'd come back from Lampedusa in Italy, which is a gateway to Europe. So I'd been in Lampedusa. I was a Church of Scotland rep, a thing there. Had literally been speaking to people who'd just come off of boats being a very generous term for what they'd made the journey on. I was speaking to people who had survived slavery and sexual violence, whose friends had died in the hours beforehand. And I then come back here, we do the World Refugee Day debate in Parliament, and the Tories came in pretending that they were part of this consensus that every other party was part of, that we should do more to welcome refugees. And I was just so disgusted by it, and so raw from the experience I'd had. I got up, and a big part of my speech was to say to the Tories, you've come here telling us that you agree, but you are card-carrying members of a party whose policies are killing people right now. I've just come back from seeing that. You know the consequences of that. I know the consequences of that. Why are you pretending? Why are you telling us that you're part of this, refugees are welcome here kind of consensus when you're not? And in parliamentary debates, you can intervene on each other. You can stand up and people can be let in. You can take time out your speech to take an intervention. And I got no interventions at that point. What I did get from a sedentary position was one particular Tory MSP shouting, "Silly child, silly child," or "silly little boy," that kind of thing. And there were like other MSPs around the room were outraged. The presiding officer didn't hear it. I'm quite sure they would have done something about it if they had. There were other MSPs who were raging on my behalf about that. But I just thought it was really, really funny because he couldn't intervene in the debate. He didn't even acknowledge what I'd said in his speech, because what is the substantive response to that? We all know what they are. We all know what they're doing. It was true. So I thought that was really funny. The other one was a debate. It was a debate to mark the Year of Young People in Scotland. We had like 2 debates to mark the Year of Young People, and I thought, well, I should probably speak in this debate. I'm the only person in Parliament who qualifies as a Year of Young People young person. So I went in and I spoke about the experiences of, like being on a 0 hours contract and precarious work is not my experience, although at the moment my job feels super precarious. But a lot of my friends are exactly as I said before in that position. So I was like sharing my friends, people of my own generation's experience. And one particular Conservative, who, it doesn't matter now, I can say, Michelle Ballantyne, not a Conservative anymore, now leader of Nigel Farage's reform outfit, got so angry at my criticism of 0 hours contracts that not only did she intervene in the debate, and fine, she actually intervened, fair play to her, and we argued about the merits and not of 0 hours contracts during the debate, but she's the only person who's ever pursued me out of the chamber into the garden lobby area of Parliament because, like, to continue the argument. And it was the classic like right-wing ageist discussion of, you should try, go out there into the real world and run a business for 5 years and you'll know what it's like. To which my response was, you should try being on a minimum wage 0 hours contract for 5 years and see how you get on doing that, which she did not particularly like. But see, beyond that, other MSPs have, like, overwhelmingly, I've never felt like they have treated me differently because of my age. Like, there's a really great culture in Parliament in a lot of respects. Again, clearly not a perfect institution. We've seen a lot of that in the last couple of weeks. I'm also aware of the fact that I'm a white man, and as time goes on, I become an older white man, and I look more and more like what your typical politician does. But I've really enjoyed the opportunities that I've had to subvert that, particularly like outside of the building, outside of Parliament. One of my favourite things is when you get invited to a school, particularly primary schools, like kind of primary 6 or 7, where kids are old enough to ask interesting questions, but young enough that they don't have like the inhibitions about asking like inappropriate questions. So they just ask you stuff like, how much are you paid? That sounds like far too much. Well, fair enough, it is. That's correct. But I love turning up to events like that, dressed like I would normally dress, and Kim will probably think, oh my God, at this point, because she knows how I normally dress, right? But the fact that I've turned up and like smart enough, but still like wearing jeans and trainers, they were expecting someone, for a start, they were expecting a man twice my age in a grey suit. I have to wear a grey suit when I'm in Parliament, no tie. I have to wear the suit when I'm in Parliament. But when you go there, it's just like that really simple thing of that's just not the person they expected to come through the door. That's not what they expected a politician to look like. And then when I start talking, that's not what they expect a politician to say. Like, it's really nice just to be able to subvert the expectations outside the building. The other bit of it though is just like there have been points, there have been a couple of occasions where, because of my age, other MSPs actually took what I was saying more seriously. So one of the first things that we did, one of the first things that every committee in Parliament does is it just plans out what its work is going to be over the next few years. And our work planning day for the Education Committee, everyone's going around talking about the 1,000,001 things that a Parliamentary Education Committee could look into. And the first thing I put on the table was personal and social education, to which the response of a lot of the other MSPs was, what's that? You say, it's the thing where you do like sex and relationship education or drugs and alcohol or mental health or whatever. I said, well, basically it's not working, folks. And I guarantee you, if we look at this, you will be shocked, like really genuinely disturbed by the evidence that we end up getting. And no one else in the room was particularly aware of it, but that was a moment where they thought, actually, like, Ross clearly has a different experience of this to us. I was still 21 at that point. We thought, well, let's go for it. Which then resulted in the first time we took an evidence session on that. I sat through that whole evidence session thinking like, oh, I've never wanted to be proved right about something being terrible so much in my life, because I didn't want to like be wrong in front of my colleagues and everything actually be fine. And lo and behold, like, we got the evidence we expected. Young LGBT people saying that their only sex education was from porn that they'd watched themselves, and that how destructive that was. People who'd never had any education about mental health and then themselves suffered from poor mental health, never learning about, you know, even how to write a CV, that kind of stuff. The short version of that incredibly long story was 3 years later, the government committed to a complete overhaul of how we do personal and social education in our schools, including a move towards proper consent-based sex education, because 3 in 4 people leave school having got sex education, but it wasn't consent-based. That just wouldn't have happened if a 21-year-old hadn't been elected. It wasn't even particularly unique to me, certainly not unique to me. I don't think it was even particularly unique to the Greens. It was just someone whose generational experience was different, was close enough to the reality of what's happening in schools at the moment. I could come in and say, actually, there's a problem here, and it just wasn't going to get put on the agenda otherwise. And the result of it was everyone else on that committee. In fact, one MSP actually said after it, I'm going to go home and talk to my then 15-year-old daughter, said, I'm going to go home and talk to my daughter about consent, because I just thought that was, she told me she was getting sex education, and I just presumed, how could you not have consent as part of it? And the outcome of that is this drastic improvement. It'll take a few years, but this drastic improvement is happening. And that kind of stuff just doesn't happen unless you've got that generational experience there. So if you do the whole, oh no, wait, have another career first, get into politics when you're 40, things will have changed by then. And if the Education Committee's just got folk who are 40 and over on it, none of them are going to come in and say, actually, I was at school a couple of years ago, and this is a really big problem, we need to fix it.
Thanks very much, Ross. For those that are watching at home, that are tuned in on Facebook, Twitch, Twitter, etc., please get your questions in. If there's anything that you want to hear from Ross or Kim, please put some comments in below and we'll make sure that they answer them for you. Ross, you were talking there about, you know, people expect you to turn up in a grey suit and look like a politician. Kim, I'd imagine it's very much the same being a councillor, and you obviously made that exception, turning up places with your pink hair. How do we change that in general, and is that shift coming already?
I don't believe that it is, and I think it's difficult, and I think it's much easier for us as white people, actually, because I know that, like, there's lots of research about, you know, especially Black women with natural hair get, you know, that's viewed as unprofessional, and they will have, you know, really negative consequences. So I think this, again, it's something that's not unique to politics, and it's more about who sets what professional means and what is professionalism, and is that a really, like, white European colonial set of standards that also requires you to be rich enough to maintain those things. And because that really was like my first week, I really I needed to go shopping, I needed to get stuff that I didn't have, and like that's an expense, do you know what I mean? And I hadn't had work for a bit because one of my contracts ran out and I was campaigning, but yeah, that was quite a significant outlay at the start, obviously, and that's not accessible. And so there's a whole load of stuff that we need to talk about, but you know, there's so many wider things about how do you politics, as Ross said, like it should look like us, it should look like us as in Scotland, it should look like Glasgow's council should look like Glasgow's population, and it really doesn't. And those are some of the questions so that people should be able to see themselves, and that's why role models are so important, because you can't be what you can't see. And the terrible thing about that really is that it puts so much burden on any of the people who are those individuals who are breaking those particular, I mean, I don't really believe in the concept of a kind of glass ceiling, because it's very capitalist, but that whole thing of like the person who's the first of their particular group of people with that protected characteristic, for example, you know, and then that's that whole burden of them always having to talk and say, like, you know, well, actually, have you considered that that's not accessible for anyone who needs a mobility aid of any kind, or have you considered that that's not accessible for someone who has a visual impairment? Have you considered that, like, and even just things like, I mean, there's no maternity leave, you know, for example, or because we're not employees, we don't have the same kind of contractual things, and actually, like, there's ways around that. But as a councillor, like, it means, like, for example, if you have time off because of a personal crisis, there's nobody there to, like, you have to do your own managed return. You can't, there's not like a structure for that, which actually is really hard, because apart from anything else, at that point, you really kind of, sometimes you just want someone to tell you, like, I want you to work these hours and not these hours, for example, you know. And it'll be different in different cases, but yeah, there's a whole load of stuff that needs to be challenged. And yeah, I think the only way to do it is, like, there's no way around that. You've got to go through it, and I hope that more of us who are there and saying, like, you are good enough to do this, and as Ross said, if you don't think you're good enough, like, go and watch a committee and you'll be surprised at how low the bar is. But like, also the things that we can do, and some of it also is just like, politics is not the only way that we make change, you know. And so it's about movements, it's about movement building, it's also about community building, and it's about making sure what we need is, when decisions are being made, then the people who are making those decisions need to look like the people who are going to be impacted by that decision, but they also need to be informed by people with lived experience of that particular subject. And so for me, it's about politics needs to be closer to politics needs to be closer to reality. I mean, that's the dream there, really. But like, we need to make better decisions, and better decisions are made by having people with lived experience, like, contributing to that. And again, we're never going to do that if there's this standard of you've got to be white and middle class and a man. Yeah, there's a long way to go. But at the same time, you know, we're there and we're still fighting.
We're getting some good questions coming in online. So the first one, Ross, I will put to you. Sophie Brodie on Facebook asks, do you think that there are enough young people from disadvantaged socio-economical backgrounds in Scottish politics? How do you think the Scottish Green Party can support these people to get involved?
I mean, the straightforward answer is no. I mean, there are not enough young people in politics, full stop. There are almost no young. If we're saying in politics, I'm talking about like in elected politics and parliamentary politics, representative politics, whatever. There are almost no young people from socioeconomically deprived or disadvantaged backgrounds. I mean, even just like to like a much wider term, there are almost no young working class people in politics, and there's all sorts of structural barriers there. Like, this is where, like, there are intersectional barriers. Therefore, our attempts to break those barriers down need to be intersectional as well. And a lot of it goes back to the point Kim was making. You know, you can't be what you can't see. That the challenge there is to get the firsts in there, but at the same time, for whoever that first person is from any particular group or community, for them not to become kind of fetishized and siloed. Say that, like one thing that I think probably will happen after this parliamentary election is the first women of colour will be elected to the Scottish Parliament, which would be fantastic and is long overdue. It's really embarrassing that's not happened until now. What would be really embarrassing though is if those women were only called upon, particularly by the media, to talk about what the media, which is overwhelmingly white men, consider to be like women of colour's issues. And actually, I mean, of the candidates I'm thinking of, you've got a range of incredibly qualified people from all sorts of different backgrounds and interesting life experiences, and they can talk about everything. They are there to be just as much of a fully rounded politician responsible for every one of these areas as everyone else. So like that's something, once people from marginalized communities get into positions of power, it's really important. Like, I am not from a marginalized community, but I was on a lower level acutely aware of that when I was elected, that I could have easily been siloed as the young MSP, not the Green MSP for the West of Scotland. And there were some people who were absolutely trying to do that, particularly because like our politics is really challenging. If you like the status quo, if you like things just kind of being how they are, if you are one of the powerful people, Green politics is really challenging because everything that we represent is about taking power away from the powerful and redistributing it to everyone else. Of course, that's challenging. So it was easier for them to be like, oh, Ross is the young MSP. He'll talk to us about stuff like social media, rather than, no, Ross is a Green MSP and actually has a pretty radical, like, I wanted to massively increase income tax on the rich to fund public services. That's what I'm here to talk about. Thanks very much. So that's a big part of it as well. I've really enjoyed the experiences I've had that have made me feel really old, where people have come up to me at events, like adults, university students or college students have come up to me at events and said, oh, I joined the Green Party because you came and spoke at my school assembly. Like, I can't believe I'm that old now that there are adults telling me that I came and spoke at their school assembly, but that is now happening. And it was like Kim said, it was, you can't be what you can't see. Someone came who they weren't expecting, who talked about the stuff that they care about, had broadly similar kind of experience of life as them, someone who wasn't that much older than them. So I think that's a major part of it. There are a million one other barriers. Like, if we want like young people from the most deprived communities specifically to get into politics, we need to acknowledge like the kind of financial barriers, the stuff that Kim's just mentioned about the clothes that you're expected to go out and buy, and the cost of that, the cost of campaigning. Like, there's an expectation on candidates in elections that you treat it like a full-time job. Well, most people need an actual full-time job to pay the rent or the mortgage, or to buy essentials. And political parties certainly need to get better at supporting candidates from the kind of backgrounds that we want to see more of in Parliament. There's a structural issue at play there, though. Like, for a party like us, we are not a party funded by multimillionaires. There are not people writing us massive six-figure checks all the time. It's just not financially possible for us to provide the level of support we would want. If this was a normal, civilized European democracy, which the UK isn't, we would have public funding of political parties, because that takes the toxic element of the influence that big private donors have. It takes that out, but it also makes sure that access is more equal across the board. So parties can actually support candidates. They can have, like, there are parliaments across Europe that are more diverse than ours on all sorts of measurements, because political parties are actually able to support their own candidates to do that. And it's a hard one, because obviously it's not necessarily something one of people that want to hear from you on the doorstep. Or if I'm elected, I'll give political parties public money. Actually, if you take it the other way around and say, well, do you like the fact that there are a couple of millionaire and billionaire donors who essentially dictate the policy agenda in the UK? Well, no, don't like that. Well, wouldn't it be great if we banned mega donations like that and equally funded political parties relative to the level of public support they've got? We can then actually start like properly breaking down these barriers, because unless you put money behind it, you could say you're breaking down barriers for all sorts of marginalized groups. You're not. You're setting people up to fail, and then to feel as if it's their own personal failure because you've not actually put the support there that's required.
Kim, I've got two questions here for yourself that have come in. I'll ask the first one from Jonathan White on Facebook, which I think is maybe slightly tongue-in-cheek. How like Hanforth Parish Council is Glasgow City Council?
Too much. Yeah. Oh God. I mean, yeah, we said we were going to be positive this week tonight, but yeah, like there's councils and there's also community councils. Like we need to think seriously in Scotland. Like, I mean, local authorities, it doesn't work. They're not local. They're absolutely enormous, and they don't have any authority. So that doesn't work structurally. And then you have community councils who are made up of people who are giving often a huge amount of time and energy, and they have no power. You know, and that's just, how is that not tokenism? Like, community councils need to genuinely be empowered. Community empowerment is this new buzzword, and it's exhausting because it's not empowerment to give people more responsibility without more budget to actually decide where that should go. So yeah, and the result of that is that you've got people who end up in roles that they're not the best in, that there's no accountability for them, and that there isn't the kind of structural oversight. And again, like what I was saying, because we're not employees, so that nobody checks my hours. I don't have a line manager. I don't have anyone checking what I'm doing. And actually, honestly, in Glasgow, there's a lot of councillors, and I'm sure in other local authorities, there's a lot of councillors who are massively overworking, and it's really detrimental to their health and well-being, and it's not okay. Because there's not any kind of clear expectation of what is enough, and like there's never enough, because actually the more work you do, the more emails you get, because people see that you're doing something. Or if you start working on an issue, then everybody and their granny gets involved with that issue, and then you like I mean, I knew that I would not be in here. Like, I knew that you can't please everyone, but honestly, it's like you can't please anyone. Like, just no one is ever satisfied. So yeah, that's quite hard. That's quite hard. And in terms of the kind of, like, there's really basic training needs, and I've been banging on about facility, like I'm a trained facilitator. That's one of the things I did before I got in, and like facilitation is a skill, is an actual skill, is a practice that has, you know, tools and time beforehand, and like it's a thing that you do to prepare. And then you go into the council and someone is made chair of a committee because they happen to be of the political party that has the most seats, regardless of their actual ability to do that job. So that is the most annoying thing, because you're sitting in a room and you're like, oh my God, we've spent half an hour going through the minutes of the last meeting. We have not achieved anything at all, and like, never mind like the waste of my time. Like, that's so bad for encouraging public participation. Why would anyone want to sit through that? Why would anyone want to get involved in that? So these things are bad for all of us, and just rip it all up and start again.
Perfect answer there, Kim. Here's a worthwhile question I have to say from Twitch, and I can sympathise with this. I remember when I was first taking my first steps into politics, and this often came up in my head. So first of all, how do you get involved with your local group? I often find through following people that the jargon can get in the way, and I find it difficult to interact because I'm so confused and scared what people mean sometimes, but just want to be able to help by any means possible. How can I do that?
Yes, amazing. Like, message us. Yeah, especially at the moment, like we have loads of campaign teams that are up and running. We have WhatsApp groups, we've got stuff, and you don't need to know any jargon at all. Like, you will literally, what we've worked really hard on in Glasgow, and again, as Ross said, like we've got always learning to do and always growing to do, but at the same time, what we've really worked hard on is making things accessible and like friendly enough. Like, one of the things that one of my experiences during the independence referendum was, like, I turned up, I was a new volunteer, I got put in a car with people I didn't know, and I was like driven to a place, and then it was like, right, there you go and knock some doors, and I was like, what? Like, that's horrendous. And so just as a kind of, that was actually one of the things that made me think, oh, I don't know why I've been ruling myself out, because I could 100% do this better. Like, give me that clipboard, I need to organize this. But it was just that thing of, because one of the things I'm really passionate about is, like, from a community work kind of practice, element is that you need to remove barriers for people. You need to tell, like, it's your job as someone who's already in that space to actively notice like what things are keeping people out. So yeah, like the other thing is like we're very action focused, which is great. So like you do not need, I promise, you do not need to go and sit in a pub and have like highfalutin discussions about political theory. I don't have time for that shit. You won't have time for that shit if you're an activist with us. Like I find that exhausting. I find it just like, oh, it's so boring. Just stop pontificating, please. Like go and actually do something. So that's my personal vendetta, but yeah, just like please just reach out on social media, like just Scottish Greens, and we can just point you to the right person. And yeah, we will get you involved, like for sure. You don't have to know anything.
Kim, you mentioned social media there, so this is probably a good time to promote your crowdfunder. As you know, Kim is standing for election in Glasgow to be an MSP. She is standing and has a crowdfunder running at the moment. The website is crowdfunder.co.uk/elect-Kim, and she's less than £200 away from her target. So if you think you would like to see Kim in Parliament, you've enjoyed what she said this evening so far, please donate in there. Ross, I've got a question from Louise on Facebook, which I think would be good for yourself. So she has asked, what do you think of the Westminster's response to the UNCRC?
Yeah, so the UNCRC is the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, and we did something really, really cool and really exciting in Scotland last week, where we took that international treaty on children's rights and we embedded it into our domestic law here in Scotland so that it could actually underpin the rights that children have here. And we did it in a really interesting and creative way. This was a process that had been led for a long time by groups like the Scottish Youth Parliament, the Children's Parliament, the Children's Commissioner. It'd really been driven by children and young people. So we've not just taken the treaty and put it into our law. What we've done is we've created a whole load of mechanisms for that to actually make some kind of difference to people. There's no point in people having rights if they can't access them and they don't know they have them. So what we've done is brilliant. I guarantee you that children in Scotland will have some of, if not the strongest rights and protections of any children on the planet once this bill is approved. The question is about the Westminster's response, because we found out yesterday or late last night that the UK government have decided they are going to challenge that bill in court, because they're alleging that the Scottish Parliament and Scottish Government don't have the competence to have passed that piece of legislation. They argue that it interferes with their powers rather than staying entirely within our own lane. Now, we don't believe that to be the case. Even the Conservatives supported this bill, so the Scottish Conservatives didn't object to it. They proposed a bunch of wrecking amendments, but it was clear they weren't going to pass, so I don't think they even pressed them to vote in the end. This is not like a pro-independence, anti-independence argument. Labour and the Lib Dems agree with us on this. If the Conservatives think that the strongest play they've got 6 weeks out from an election in Scotland is to try and prevent children from having more rights, like, they're welcome to pursue that as an electoral strategy if they want. I obviously dearly hope they lose in court on this one. I mean, if they win in court, if the UK, it'll go to the UK Supreme Court in the end. If the UK Supreme Court finds that the Scottish Parliament doesn't have the powers, the competence to do this, well, I mean, that to me then does just become an argument for independence. Like, if we can't protect children's rights with the powers that we've got, then we need more power. But we shouldn't be compromising on stuff like this. We are absolutely and utterly committed to giving children in Scotland the strongest possible rights and protections. So it's a bold move from the UK government, would be a polite way of putting it. Interesting that they're doing it now rather than having raised these concerns months ago. This has been like a 10-year process to get us to this point. The bill itself is 2 or 3 years in the making. So the fact that they're doing it now, after we've passed it, to me that just seems more like this is how they think they can save the union, by like undermining and attacking the Scottish Parliament, which is the strategy that got us to the point where support for independence is now at basically 50%. So it's madness from like a political strategy point of view. It's also just like a horrendous thing to do. Like, why make the hill that you're prepared to die on be preventing children's rights? Like, if there's a hill you want to die on, it should be enhancing children's rights, not denying them. So yeah, that's the weird situation we're in at the moment. The court case on it it certainly won't be heard this side of the election, I expect, but they've now made it an election issue. Like the question of does the Scottish Parliament have the competence to defend children's rights? That's now an issue in the election where you've got 4 parties all saying yes and the Tories saying no. So yeah, I mean, best of luck to them pursuing that strategy.
Got loads of questions coming in now. So another one about getting involved. So I live in the Highlands and would love to get more involved in local activism, but because of both my age and my rural setting, I feel really isolated from other like-minded people. I was wondering if you have any advice for me personally to get involved despite living in a remote setting. Kim, I'll come to you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm sorry that's been your experience. I can imagine. And yeah, I think the internet is our best bet in these kind of things. And again, like that's why that's how we're able to organize as a party. You know, we have we use Slack as our communications tool and stuff. We do a lot of stuff over WhatsApp and we were doing virtual meetings before at school, obviously. But no, like we have yeah, we've got strong Greens in the Highlands and Islands, and we can definitely, if you message the Scottish Greens like on social media, we can, or maybe we can put it in the chat if there's like one email address to get in touch with. But yeah, so like there's definitely people there. Also, we have the Scottish Young Greens who are super lovely, super radical, and there's definitely folk from Highlands and Islands who are part of the Young Greens, like for sure. And yeah, there's young people from all over Scotland who are involved. So like we'd love to have you. Please come join.
The best Young Greens AGM that we've ever had. I mean, AGMs are not usually the most exciting part of your year in any particular group, but the Young Greens are really good at it. And the best AGM that we've ever had was last year's, where it was in lockdown, because it had far more people at it than we'd had at any of the physical in-person stuff. It had far more rural Young Greens at it than we would ever normally have if we'd had it in, you know, like Glasgow or Perth or something like that. So yeah, I mean, I realize like even in a rural area, like all the broadband issues and stuff sometimes make even connecting online that bit more challenging. But the last year has proven that like that you can absolutely have these relationships, you can be involved in activism, and you can do it all online, you can do it all remotely. Like clearly there is a value in physical on the ground in-person campaigning, and you know, even in rural communities you can do that. It's actually much more effective in a rural community. Like if you really believe in our politics, you are the most persuasive advocate for it. We did loads of research on this back in 2014 for the independence vote, and unsurprisingly found that your own friends and family and your neighbours are like 7 times more persuasive for you than politicians or journalists are. So if you want to get your friends and family voting Green, you live in a small rural community, they will, I guarantee you, put a huge amount of trust in what you're saying. Even if it's people who are not immediately convinced by it, they'll really value the fact that you're saying it, and they will listen to you. So even if you're in that kind of setting, rather than in a much bigger area where you can go campaign essentially anonymously, you know, up and down tenements and stuff, that actually puts you in an incredibly powerful place to do the physical person to person stuff. But as Kim said, like get involved in the Young Greens, because like they I say they as if I feel like I'm not a Young Green anymore, and I've still got like 5 years of being a Young Green left. I'm such a young fogey, but they have done such a great job at making sure that our young members across the country feel really involved and engaged. And like Kim said, like folk get to know each other and establish friendships and stuff that they just wouldn't have been able to otherwise. And we've done all of that online for a year now, and folk have got involved in the last year, joined the party for the first time, not met anyone else face to face in person, but you know, after a year of being a member and engaging with us online, we've got folk who are now, you know, like senior office bearers in branches and on committees and stuff like that, and they're doing a brilliant job. It's not a barrier.
Very nice comment here for you, Kim, from Andrew Fry. I would love to see Kim elected, but is Harvey no longer a candidate here? So Andrew, just to quickly answer that, yeah, both Kim and Patrick are both standing for election in Glasgow, and if the polling that we've seen at the moment is consistent, you will see them both elected as MSPs in May. So yeah, please vote for both Kim and Patrick on the regional list by voting for the Scottish Greens. Here's one here. The working class don't have time to truly involve in politics. It's completely inaccessible. There needs to be more effort to allow the working class to mobilise. Ross.
Yeah, so I mean that goes back to, in terms of electoral politics, it's the stuff I said before about like you need public funding of political parties. Otherwise, politics is just like a playground of the rich, which it's a bit better in Scotland. Like Westminster politics is clearly absolutely a playground of the rich. So that's a big part of it if you want to make electoral politics more accessible. Like one way in which the working class, for the history of there being a working class since the Industrial Revolution, have consistently exercised their power and achieved great things is through the trade union movement. And I would encourage everyone in any workplace, regardless of what you do, to join and get involved in a trade union. Because I mean, apart from anything else, if you're saying you've not got time for it, you're depending on like your role in the union and stuff, there are obligations on your employer if they recognise the union to give you time to do that really, really important work and to do your politics through that. In my area though, like thinking of like education and the work I've done over the last 5 years, one thing that I really, really want us to do in Scotland is to, and this might sound strange at first, so I'll explain it, is to get serious about debating and public speaking as a skill that we want every young person to have. Because at the moment, like if you think of like school debating competitions, totally dominated by kids from private schools and very privileged backgrounds, that's an incredible skill though. Once you get into adult life, the ability to project yourself with confidence. I mean, Kim and I have both alluded pretty strongly to the fact that there are a lot of people in politics who can project themselves with incredible confidence without necessarily having the ability to back that up. Like if the incredible unrealized talent of working class young people, if we made sure that every young person in Scotland had an opportunity to do debating and public speaking and all that kind of stuff, I think we would actually level the playing field way more than we expect. It sounds like a totally left field thing, but the advantage that young people from really privileged backgrounds, private school in particular, have, that ability to project themselves in any setting, whether it's, you know, job interviews or in politics itself, anything like that, that is absolutely massive. And it goes back to the kind of crisis of confidence stuff that we're constantly working on with people from all sorts of marginalized groups who don't feel they're good enough, don't feel that politics is for them. If we get in early and, you know, from a young age, from school, make sure that young working class people are equipped with the skills to advocate for what they believe in, the long-term effects of that, I really, really believe would be absolutely transformational. But when I was at school, I did all the debating and stuff, and like those of us who were there from state schools, like your objective wasn't to win, it was just to beat the private schools. Like for better or for worse, that was like the only motivation that we had doing these debating competitions and stuff. If every single school in Scotland was involved in stuff like that, I guarantee you that politics 10 years from now would look completely different.
Yeah, for me, there's something like in terms of the bigger picture, though this is such an argument for universal basic income, because you just see like the way that class defines the choices and opportunities a young person has. And like having been a youth worker and then now, so I host like a mentoring circle for young women, and they're all at that kind of like uni, college, going into like first jobs kind of thing, and the way that class shows up, because young people who are middle class, who have parental support, who can go to uni and just focus on studying, and then you've got young people who have to work their ass off just to get by, and like that's not just that they have to have a job, it's literally that they then don't have time or energy for other stuff. So like whenever you're like, when I was running a project, you know, as a youth worker, the ones who didn't show up, it's because they were knackered or because they had to work. And that's even when I was doing things like, you know, we made sure we paid for their travel expenses and we made sure we had paid childcare and stuff like that. So even when you do those kind of things, you're still like swimming against this huge tide of like, oh, okay, well, you know, and then that replicates itself, because then those young people miss out on those connections and those like the circles, and then the kind of growth that you get from being in part of a project, and they just don't get to be part of that because they're too busy working in a shit minimum wage 0 hours contract, but they still have to be available for that. And so it takes all of their time and all of their labor, and then they miss out on all the stuff. They miss out on trips, they miss out on, you know, residentials, they miss out on like so many opportunities, and then that compounds itself and compounds itself, because the ones who were there then have those connections, and then they can grow into the next things, they can get the jobs, they can, like, that is, you know, that is how class just continues to perpetuate itself. And universal basic income is not a panacea, but it would just remove that floor. And if we can remove that stage of having to just work yourself to the bone just to survive, then think about the opportunities that would open up, and think about all of the people whose contributions to this country that we are missing out, you know, not just in terms of labor, but in terms of ideas and in terms of like artistic, like creativity, and we are just missing all of them. And do we really think that like Black young people don't have ideas, or working class young people don't have ideas? No, that's ludicrous. Of course they do, but they just don't have an opportunity because they're too busy working themselves to the bone. So yeah, universal basic income now.
We've just passed the hour mark, folks, so I am going to take a couple more questions and then we'll wrap up for the evening. But Callum McCarry has said, in a soon-to-be independent Scotland, what would be the first advantage you would take from the reserved matters from the UK? Ross.
So many options. It's so exciting. Yeah, what can we do when we finally have our own country? Yeah, I mean, like the kind of big one is obviously, you know, like getting rid of Trident's the kind of big symbolic one. But see, for me, like one of the first things that is so easy, raise the minimum wage. Like so many children, 2/3 of children in this country live in poverty, are in a working household. Like parent or carer is in work, but people are being paid poverty wages by their employer because the government doesn't set a minimum wage that matches the real living wage. Overnight, the transformational impact it would have if people were actually paid a dignified wage for their work. So yeah, like I struggle to think of something that I would want to do quicker that is even just as simple as, say, raise the minimum wage so it's a living wage.
Good answer. Kim, how do you beat that?
I wouldn't, but this is a more of a, it's not a quick fix, but I cannot wait until we can start again with immigration. Like, especially if you saw what Priti Patel came out with yesterday, like, I mean, it's horrific. It's absolutely horrific. Like, one, it completely doesn't work. And two, she's just kind of shouting all these like racist dog whistles, none of which are in any way accurate. Like, everybody on earth has the right to seek asylum. You cannot be an illegal asylum seeker. It's literally not possible to be one. And so that's what I've ended up. I didn't really have any background in asylum justice, but as a local councillor, I've been really involved in that, because Glasgow is the city in Scotland that people are dispersed to from other parts of the UK. So when people they've made a claim and they're seeking protection, and then they get like sent to Glasgow basically to wait indefinitely. You're not allowed to work, and you're not eligible for like mainstream benefits. You're not eligible for homelessness benefits or kind of housing benefit, anything like that. You're not eligible, and you're also not allowed to work. So people are trapped in this absolutely horrific situation, and some people are waiting 20 years. Like, it is just kind of dystopian, and that's happening in Glasgow, like, you know, in your tenement close, in your kid's school. Like, this is happening all the time. So I've become very involved in these issues, and like, every time you think that it can't get worse, it gets worse. Every time you think that you haven't heard the worst story, then someone comes along and tells you something just really heartbreaking. And it's often these really like what should be very basic things, like a guy I was supporting, he had toothache for 7 weeks, really bad toothache, and because he couldn't get dental treatment because he was actually eligible, but he had to wait for the right form to be sent to him by the Home Office to prove that he was eligible for this dental treatment, and he obviously couldn't afford to pay up front. So he had toothache for 7 weeks. And like, that's so inhumane, and it robs people of their dignity, and it robs people of their like often their will to live, tragically. Like that's the kind of situation that we've seen. So yeah, like the way that the opportunity there for Scotland to be like, okay, how do we create a system that is about dignity, that is about fairness, that's about giving people a fair hearing. I mean, even the most like right-wing arguments about like, but at least they get a fair hearing. No, they don't. Like our asylum system is an absolute joke. It doesn't give people a fair hearing at all. Like you get sent to a meeting with the wrong interpreter. Like how's that a fair hearing? There's like a myriad of examples of that. Like it's not in any way a fair system, and people do not get a fair hearing at all. And they are living in absolute poverty while they're waiting indefinitely. So yeah, that would be hugely important, and it would be like basic principles, like you have the right to work while you're waiting on a decision. Bam. Okay. So, and that's cheaper for the state, by the way. Like even if you're wanting to go down that route, like it would be much cheaper to enable people to work. So yeah, we could actually work with people who've been through the system. They should be in charge of designing a better one and a fairer one. And there's a huge amount of expertise and a huge amount of resilience because people have kind of survived this system, and you know they know what we should do to be better. And it would have trauma counselling, and it would have all of these things that were inbuilt to kind of support people to be able to like build their new lives and bring their new like experiences to Scotland. And the thing is, we need that because we've got, you know, areas that have been depopulated, and we need people to do lots of different jobs, and we've got an aging population, and we need immigrants. So yeah, we just need to have this completely different way of looking at things. But yeah, actually treating people with dignity would be massive, and you know, that would be a kind of Scotland that I'd be proud to be from.
That's brilliant. Final point then from Ben on Twitch, I believe it is. He wrote, "My mot is a Tory. Hand over eyes, hand over eyes." What would you say, and be polite here, to Ben's maw to try and convince him not to be a Tory and to vote Green on the 6th of May? Ross.
I think this is a terrible moment for my connection to be dying. I don't know if you can even hear me anymore.
Yes, all good. Yes, all.
Oh, grand, right. I can't see much of you guys, but I'm sure it's fine. I mean, we're asking people to vote like our future depends on it, because it does. If he's speaking to his mom, she should think about, you know, what kind of world does she want to leave for him and for his kids and for everyone else, right? Regardless of what your views on, you know, conservative philosophy, individualism, anything like that is, right? The world is on fire, and we have got 9 years left to do something about it. We need to do really, really big things in the amount of time that we've got left, or her son's life is going to be defined by the rest of his adult life is going to be defined by this crisis, and for everyone else, that's what's going to be the case. So even if you disagree with us on a whole bunch of other stuff, we're the anti-end of the world party. We just want to make things better for people and for planet. And you know, we can have a debate about independence, we can have a debate about the European Union, but like the absolute core of what it is to be a Green is a belief that things can and should be better for people and for the planet. And that's exactly what we're offering on the 6th of May. Like, we've spent 5 years delivering this kind of stuff, right? We've spent 5 years bit by bit making things better for people. You know, free school meals for all children in primary school. That's going to be rolled out over the next year because of us. We have been able to make a tangible difference to people because we're in politics to do that. We're not in politics to posture. We're not in politics just to shout really loudly about what we believe in. We're really committed to actually trying to do some good. So I guarantee that if she votes for us, her vote will be powerful. We will do something with it. We have a record that proves that we can do something with it. And it's something that will make her kids' lives and their kids' lives better.
Brilliant. Ben has replied saying, "Don't worry, the Greens have my vote." But Kim, why should Ben's mum vote for yourself and why should you vote, or why should you tell our family and friends across Scotland to vote for the Scottish Greens?
Yeah, I'd say, I mean, what Ross said, like yesterday I was looking at this map, and it was in, I saw it in the Glasgow Times, actually, the Evening Times. It was linked to this map that's been done about the kind of flood risk for Glasgow and the west of Scotland in 20 years' time. And like my wee dad's house is underwater, and that is like a house that he has bought and like done up with his bare hands because he stupidly decided to do that instead of, you know, getting anyone in. But he's done that over years and years, like rebuilt this like shell of a derelict house into like this gorgeous home. And you know, he's not even 60 yet, so in 20 years time, like, you know, God willing, he'll still be with us. And the whole point was having a house that was all in one level, that it would be somewhere that he could stay in, you know. And 20 years, like, it's so this isn't, I mean, I think it's difficult because we need to have hope in the midst of all of this, and the climate crisis sometimes really takes your breath away. But like for me, that's like I don't really believe in that thing of like, this isn't political, because everything is political, everything is always political. But at the same time, like the most urgent thing that we've got to do is tackle the climate crisis. And for me, surely that's more urgent to you than any kind of other like flag waving or, you know, any other issue, because we've only got 9 years left. And the other thing is that, like, I'm sure that your mum cares about, you know, not just you and you know, your future, but also like her friends and her family and you know, the city. And I don't know where you're coming from, but like, for example, the vision that we have, like, and again, I'm just talking about Glasgow because that's where I'm from, it's where I represent. But like a Glasgow that is resilient in terms of climate change is also a much fairer city. So think about a Glasgow where everyone's got good air to breathe, everyone has a good source of sustainable food, that we have dignity about food. We've got, you know, everyone had somewhere to grow their own food, and everyone has access to that. And we don't have these food deserts like Castlemilk where you actually can't buy any fresh fruit or veg like anywhere. You know, we've got these community spaces, we've got warm homes, everyone's got a home that's actually warm, so you don't have fuel poverty anymore, and that you don't have these like buildings that are kind of crumbling because no one's investing in them. And like, those are things. And you've got public transport that's actually good and that is free and that everyone can use it and it goes where you want it to be. And you've got cycle infrastructure that means that wherever you want to go, from your home to your work, to picking up the school, to going to the doctors, to like running errands, you know, getting the messages, like you've got a safe way to walk that, or to wheel that, or to cycle that. Like, that's the kind of stuff that we're talking about. And that is a climate resilient city, and it also is a city that is so much fairer, you know, because we know that climate change, in the same way that climate change has massively impacted, like Ross was saying at the start, like climate change globally has impacted people in the global south so much worse, regardless of the fact that those were not the people who've contributed to the carbon emissions. But we're going to see that as well in our cities and in our towns, because the areas with the worst air quality, it's not the rich areas. Like, where did they build a motorway? It wasn't in the West End. The areas with the worst, the poorest communities are the people who don't have access to a car. So like where I represent in the Northeast, 55% of people who stay here do not have access to a car. So we are reliant on public transport, and our public transport is dreadful, right? So these are all climate issues, and we know that a fairer city is a greener city, and a greener city is a fairer city. So your mum must care about these things, because these are things that everybody cares about, right? So if you vote for us, we will continue to work really hard to make a fairer, greener Glasgow for me, and a fairer, greener Scotland for all of us.
Thank you very much, Kim. Ben has come back very quickly saying there is no persuading her. Trust me, Ben, there is 6 weeks until the election, and that is your task over the next 6 weeks, is we are asking you to convince your Tory maw to vote for the Scottish Greens. Ross, Kim, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you this evening. I hope that everyone watching and listening at home has really enjoyed this. If you have done so, please get in touch with the party through the social media channels if you want to get involved. We will also pop a link below in the comments for Kim's crowdfunder. As I said earlier, she is less than £200 away from hitting her target. So if you've enjoyed what you've heard, you want to see Ross and Kim, Ross re-elected to the Scottish Parliament and Kim elected to the Scottish Parliament, please donate as well. Please get involved, and thanks so much for your time. Cheers.